Welcome to Myasthenia Gravis Society of Canada. We have a guest speaker. Her name is Theresa, and she is from mental health. So she's going to be doing a talk for us today.
I'm Theresa Maybury. I'm a mental health clinician and a health educator with the Canadian Mental Health Association. A little bit about my background is I graduated neuroscience. I have psychology degrees, I have sociology degrees, and I also have my master's in psychotherapy. Quite an extensive schooling. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please. I love questions. I can't promise that I'll know all the answers, but I will do my best to answer them, okay? And if I don't know, I can always, relay that information to my colleagues with consults and then bring it back to you, to your group. Today we're going to be exploring the impacts of prolonged stress and chronic burnout. So the purpose of today, realistically, is to, chronic stress is a prolonged and often overwhelming feeling of stress that negatively impacts a person's daily life. So we're going to be learning, to build a better understanding of what stress and the stress responses are, to learn differences between acute and chronic stress to promote mental health and coping strategies and bring light to available tips and resources. If we have time at the end, I would like to do one of my favorite breathing exercises with you that I do to mitigate some feelings of chronic stress. And if you practice it on a daily basis, it is proven to alleviate our overall cortisol. And we're going to design a strategy to help maintain our own mental health and wellness. So I just like to give the stats because it is a little bit of a wow factor, especially since we've just undergone COVID. And what we associate COVID with oftentimes is isolation. So they're probably unsurprising, but it's still surprising to hear. In 2022, approximately 35% of Canadians aged 15 and older reported higher levels of stress. And that's actually up 11% from 2018. Nearly 2/3, so 65% of Canadians aged 15 and older, self-reported experiencing elevated levels of stress for most or all of the time. And that's a big indicator there, most or all of the time. So it's chronic. And that chronicity leads to some things that we'll talk about in this session. 76 of employed Canadians reported symptoms of psychological distress related to their job during the pandemic. And 82% of Canadian millennials expressed concerns over potential long-term effects of the pandemic on their mental health. So that's things that are staying with us to its entirety and we don't expect to recover from. So what is chronic stress? Does anyone know? Anyone can jump in at any time, by the way. Who here has felt chronic stress?
Anybody who has a chronic illness has chronic stress.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, right? A chronic illness, potentially another mental health factor in that as well, not even just the physical side. It can contribute to a multivariate of things too. So chronic stress, what it is referred to prolonged periods of physiological arousal or heightened response to external stimuli or internal thoughts. It can result from a traumatic event, like incarceration or unemployment, relationship problems, substance use, the list goes on, as we can imagine. It is prolonged low-intensity stresses, like being married or caring for a partner who requires substantial caregiving. So that kind of leads to caregiver burnout. What we identified just now is living with a chronic illness ourselves. And when subjected to chronic stress, individuals often exhibit maladaptive coping mechanisms that further exacerbate and perpetuate their suffering. So that would mean oftentimes I did one of my theses in the multifaceted dimensions of chronic pain, actually. So I've worked with chronic pain clinics, I've worked with chronic illness, and oftentimes we see some coping mechanisms that leads to forms of escapism, and it is a coping mechanism initially. So we'll give the example of getting into an addiction. We'll give that example. For the interim, we think that we can handle that. And we think that it mitigates symptoms because it does. It is a coping mechanism. But over time, you can see, and you can probably note that it would lead to a slippery slope, and that exacerbates our symptoms and perpetuates our suffering, right? So that's just a trivial example there, but we're going to kind of touch on the resiliency portion of chronic stress as well. Oh, next slide. I'm ahead of myself. So normal stress resiliency is, I always like to say 5 out of 5 Canadians have mental health, because we all have mental health issues. We all have our ups and downs. And whether it's diagnosable or not, that is a reality for everybody. So we're going to undergo stress, and stress, necessarily is actually a healthy indicator that we can respond to. It's just over time that chronicity leads to that maladaptivity. So normal stress resiliency, stress enters us, we enter a peak arousal rate. So that means our heightened perception and tension and heart rate might go up. But then we'll come down. We'll come down to our resting baseline over time, with support of our peers, with action. We're meant to come out of our stress and survival response. So what stress really is, it's a chemical reaction initiated in the brain that evokes a physiological or behavioral or emotional or cognitive response to a stimulus in an environment, to a perceived threat. Whereas anxiety, which we'll talk about on the next slide, that leads into chronic stress, is evoked without an obvious trigger. A stress response is a response regarding external factors and dissipates once perceived threats have kind of left the area. But what we get oftentimes with whether that be, a chronic illness or maybe a family member that we can't seem to avoid, or that causes us in a state of unwell, we get anxiety. And anxiety is caused by internal, socio-emotional, it can be physical factors that linger even once a threat has lifted, because it feels like that threat has never lifted. So, sorry, there you go. So chronic stress, what I'm talking about, is stress enters, and there isn't that is our resting baseline. So you see that red line right there, that baseline was before lowered to the bottom, and now that baseline is up. So our peak arousal, while we might get a little bit more aroused in states of high stress environments, our lower baseline is no longer existent. We're existing in that peak arousal. So a stressful situation, whether something, environmental, like a looming deadline, or psychological, like a persistent worry, or physiological, like our pain, it can trigger a cascade of stress hormones that produce very well orchestrated physiological changes. Like a stressful incident can make our heart pound and breathe in, and our muscles tense, and sweat appear. And this combination of reactions really and truly are called our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, or fight or flight. And these responses, it involves a survival mechanism. So, enabling people and other mammals to react to life-threatening situations in those situations is beneficial for us. So we actually need our stress hormones. It's beneficial for us to react in those situations. What's unfortunate is that once our peak arousal, that baseline, is pulled up there, we no longer know how to react appropriately in those situations. And not only that, the body can also overreact to stressors that are not life-threatening, like traffic jams. You get this with road rage, or your work pressures, or family discussions even. You'll see that your chronic stress leading to burnout could cause you to yell at a partner, or to yell at your friend, or to be so hard on yourself that you feel like the sky is falling, because the sky is falling for you, because your baseline is no longer a baseline. So, over the years, researchers have learned that not only how and why these reactions occur, but have also gained insight into the long-term effects that chronic stress has on physiological and psychological health. So over time, repeated activation of that stress suggests that chronic stress contributes to high blood pressure. It promotes the formation of artery clogging deposits and causes brain changes that may contribute to furthering anxiety and depression and addiction. And more preliminary research suggests that chronic stress may also contribute to obesity, both through direct mechanisms, causing people to eat more as a form of escapism, and that's, perpetuating the chronicity of the problem, or indirectly decreasing the amount of adequate sleep that we get, or the capability of adequate exercise that we get. So when people, experience a stressful event, the amygdala, which is, essentially the center of the brain, and it's responsible for emotional processing and interpretation of pictures and sounds, sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. And that's the area of the brain that essentially acts as a command center. And then that hypothalamus communicates with the rest of the body through that nervous system that I was talking about, that fight or flight. So those physiological responses to stress in the limbic system, which is the amygdala, emotion, hypothalamus, homeostasis, so our balance, our capability of balancing out our hormones and our regulation and our heat, the nervous system, sympathetic nervous system, that limbic system is pulled out of whack, is pulled out of alignment. And I'll take you back, being really nerdy here for a second here, but I'll take you back to the sine wave that's equal parts up and equal parts down. And what it means is it's a net zero, because it's equal parts up and equal parts down. So plus and minus 4, let's say, equals 0. And that's what we want to crave on a daily basis. That's what we want to crave because it's a balance. But when we have chronic stress, we are no longer capable of maintaining that balance. And that feels very overwhelming a lot of the time. And I'm going to go through some signs and symptoms that we can identify if we have chronic stress. And I would love for people to come forward to share stories. So if you ever want to put up your hand or take off the mic, please feel free to jump in at any time. Because I think that it's more participatory, and honestly, talking about it alleviates some stressful feelings. So some signs and symptoms of chronic stress that most of the common ones that we see are physical or behavioral, emotional, and we'll talk about the other ones too, but physical and behavioral. It's funny that we think of chronic stress because most people would assume that it's all emotional based. But if you think of a stressed out situation, you'll notice that, maybe your heart rate's up. You feel it physiologically. You feel it, whether it be in your heart or your throat or, your tensed shoulders. You feel tired. There's a change in appetite and eating patterns. In the DSM, what's interesting is eating more or less than usual. So you're the only person that's going to know what more or less than usual looks like to you. And I think that in clinical studies and clinics with patients, I always want to say that fact, because more or less than usual to you could look normal to me. So you're the expert of your own experience. So if you ever do seek help, make sure that you advocate for yourself, because you are the expert of your own experience. I don't live in your body. I don't live what you're going through. And that's the point of contacting someone, is to get that out. So changes in sleeping patterns, so sleeping more or less than usual, that's in the diagnostic criteria as well. Restlessness, somatic complaints. So that would be, digestive issues, nausea, dizziness, increased blood pressure, headache, anything that makes us feel pretty unwell. Flu-like symptoms are often associated with increased stress. Compromised immune system, so susceptibility to those colds or infections. Changes in libido, and this could be more or less than usual. And again, you're going to know your baseline, right? And you're going to know where your baseline is sitting, especially if it's elevated, like we talked about with chronic stress. And also changes in alcohol, drug, nicotine use. This doesn't need to be street drugs either. This could be, maybe we're self-medicating a little bit overboard. And you're going to know that. Again, even if you're prescribed PRN, or Pro-Renata, so take as needed, even if you're prescribed that and you normally only take one, but you have a prescription for 4 a day, if you're taking 4 a day all of a sudden, potentially that's an indicator of stress. So, do you like the science portion? We don't have to do it, but do you like hearing a little bit about the science portion?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah? Okay. Okay, yeah. I just always like to check in, because sometimes people are like, oh, we're gonna need a snooze by this lady. Okay. So, the hypothalamus in our limbic system, which is a big indicator of stress. That's the command center there. That area of the brain communicates with the rest of the body through the autonomic nervous system. And that can kind of control involuntary body functions like breathing or blood pressure or heartbeat, something that we can't change that. That's internal. So involuntary body functions like breathing or dilation and constriction of key blood vessels and small airways. The autonomic nervous system, the two components, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic, think of it like a gas pedal to a car. It triggers the fight or flight response, providing the body kind of with this burst of energy so that it can respond to those dangers. The parasympathetic nervous system acts like a brake. So it's promoting the rest and digest phases. So, the sympathetic car, parasympathetic brake, when those are out of the line, or after the amygdala sends that distress symbol to the hypothalamus and activates the sympathetic nervous system by sending the autonomic, nerves to the adrenal glands. Those glands respond by pumping hormones because, we're gas pedal to the floor. And that epinephrine circulates through the body, and it brings on a whole heck of a lot of physiological changes. So the heart beats faster than normal. It pushes, blood to the muscles, to the heart. Your pulse goes up, your pressure goes up. And the person undergoing these changes, they're going to start breathing more rapidly. And that's oftentimes, that hyperventilation that we get with high stress. And as the lungs can take this much oxygen in with each potential breath, that extra oxygen goes to our brain. And that's why we have an increased alertness. We have an increased capability of visual acuity. So we can see better. We can hear better. The other senses become sharper because of that oxygenation. Epinephrine triggers the release of blood sugar, so glucose and fats from temporary storage site to the body, so that we're ready to fight with all that we have. All of these changes happen so quickly that people aren't aware of them. In fact, wiring is so efficient in the amygdala and hypothalamus that this cascade starts even before the brain is really aware of it. And that's why people are able to jump out of the path of oncoming traffic or lift a car. You hear those stories of a mother lifting the car over her baby is because of that adrenaline. And as the initial surge of epinephrine subsides, the hypothalamus activates that second component of that stress response is the HIPAA axis, so HPA axis. And that controls the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and that's essentially after that gas pedal is activated, that parasympathetic nervous system, the brake, then dampens that stress response. And that's when we return to the baseline. Chronic low-level stress keeps that HPA axis activated, like a motor that's almost idling for too long. And after a while, the body can contribute to health problems associated with that chronic stress. So it can damage blood vessels and arteries and increase blood pressure and increase risk of heart attacks and strokes and elevate that cortisol. And, for example, it could elevate weight gain as well, because over time, if that cortisol is elevated, cortisol increases our appetite. So, people will want to eat more to obtain extra energy, and it also increases storage of unused nutrients as fat. So it's related to all of these physiological changes too. And so when I talk about stress, I do like to kind of bring some science into it. I'm sorry that you're listening to this, but I do like to bring science into it, because this is a direct relation of how mental health is connected to our physiological health as well. And it gives you like a good picture that they're all interrelated. This is a symbiotic relationship between our psyche and our physicality, right? So I will stop boring you with the physical stuff. We will move on to the emotional symptoms of chronic stress. And these are feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, overwhelmed, inadequate, fragile, vulnerable, agitated, restless, sad, and irritable. And, you feel like you're unable to cope, and you have these increased mood swings, and potentially oftentimes you don't feel like you have control over it. And you feel like, potentially anything that's coming into your environment could quote unquote, what I get from a lot of clients is set you off, because you're so irritable and you don't know how to regulate yourself anymore, because again, when you're at chronic stress, that baseline is pulled up. So that could portray decreased motivation. You could cry more easily and more frequently. A lot of my clients, they say, I was making toast the other day and I started crying. And it seems unrelated. It seems so unrelated, but it's because that we've been battling this for so long, and we are not giving back into ourselves. And we are worrying about our family and ourselves, and maybe the burdens that we're causing or they're causing. And, all of these things are interplaying. And we haven't given ourselves enough respite to take a break and take a breath. So that's when oftentimes I find isolation and withdrawal from our family, from our friends, from things that we used to love doing. Things that we find joy in right now are no longer joyous. So changes in communication patterns and other relationship dynamics can come of this too. And that's an important factor to touch on. And then there's mental as well, right? So an overload of stress, when we are overloading our nervous systems here, it can cause difficulty in making decisions, because our brain is in disarray right now. It can cause confusion or memory blanks. It can cause me to look for my phone when my phone is in my hand. It can have ambiguous feelings. I don't feel like I'm happy or sad. I just feel like I'm surviving. And I think that a big part that I work on with clients is I don't want you to just survive. I want you to thrive. And that's not, me choosing what thriving means for you. That's you choosing what thriving means for you. And it should be individualized, and it should be what you want it to look like. And it should be realistic, right? And I think that going with SMART goals is always the best: sustainable, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-oriented. So make sure that we put a time frame on when we'd like to reach our goals, right? Otherwise, oftentimes goals become thoughts that become forgotten. But, focusing on those negative thoughts all the time, those intrusive thoughts that we come without combating them, can increase our mental stress too. Now, you can imagine that mental load, that physical load, that emotional load are all going to lead to burnout. Does anyone know what burnout is? Donna, I see your hand.
Stop.
Yeah, never stop.
Yeah, that was me. I mean, I've hit burnout a couple of times, and that's just when I just wanted to hold up a big red sign. Stop.
Yeah. That's a good visual for it. I just want to hold, almost like a stop sign, like, please just stop everything. It doesn't matter what it is, just I can't have any input, I can't give any output. And it feels like you're at an impasse with yourself. And I think that oftentimes with burnout, we can have a lot of sense of guilt too, because we can't do anything anymore, because we've rode our bodies to this point. We haven't fed back into ourselves. And, trust me, with chronic pain, with chronicity, with chronic illness, burnout comes. And I think that we need to have some ways to overcome it. So, the term burnout originated in the 60s during a study conducted by a psychologist, Freudenberger. And actually, it's good to mention that it was actually his graduate student with him too, Gail Sheehy, that they don't mention on this, but on stress experienced by human service workers providing therapy to clients with drug addiction. And that's where this came from. They noticed patterns of symptomology that indicated depersonalization, that indicated cynicism and fatigue and loss of idealism and detachment from their clients. And these were top earners in the social services department that were opposite of this. But over time, they developed all of these symptoms, and they were originally described as staff member attrition reactions, and then later labeled burnout syndrome, because it led to more investigation into what eventually would be known as occupational burnout, or simply burnout, which encompasses not only exhausted individuals, but organizations as a whole. And now, with employment services, at least, burnout is more likely, when employees expect too much of themselves, never feel that the work that they are doing is good enough, feel inadequate or incompetent in some way, unappreciated for their work efforts, have unreasonable demands placed on them, and are in roles that are not a good job fit. And we can associate this with everyday life too, right? Are we expecting too much of ourselves in this given moment? And I think that, monitoring what is realistic for us, I can resonate with the fact that I used to play national soccer. I can resonate with the fact that I just watched the Canadian men's and I really want to do that. But I can't anymore. My body can't. I've gone through multiple surgeries and I can't. And I know that's not realistic for me anymore. So expecting too much of myself there, never feeling that the work they are doing is good enough. That is one that I'm sure resonates with all of us. But I think that goes back into the SMART goals of setting those sustainable, measurable, attainable goals, that realism, and time-oriented, that we need to start kind of fighting back against that negative self-talk. And we're going to go into coping mechanisms next, but I just really wanted to stop here and make sure that burnout, it's a feeling of inadequacy that comes along with it, that feeling of guilt that I said. And I want us to stop and say that, it looks like I'm getting a lot of head shakes, that we've all felt this. And I'm here to say that make sure that you tell yourself, you look in that mirror, that you are not inadequate. There is a lot that you can still offer. And maybe we are expecting too much of ourselves. Okay. So, sorry, coping mechanisms. Somebody has the news on. I can hear it in your background. But coping mechanisms. So before I go on to coping mechanisms, and we're going to go on, the acceptance part that I touched on a little bit, we're going to be taking stock, identifying sources of stress, and creating a self-care plan and building resiliency. What are some everyday coping mechanisms that you have right now, if you could share them?
Ensuring that I get enough oxygen by getting outside.
Absolutely, outside. I have so much to say about that, but static environments, removing yourself from a static environment. What is a static environment? It's anywhere inside that bars you from hearing auditory stimuli, that bars you from visualizing, so seeing visuals outside. The trees are moving outside, right? The trees are rustling, the leaves are rustling. You can hear animals potentially. You can hear street signs. That's not a static environment anymore, and we are more likely to hold a thorough thought process rather than get stuck in that circular pattern of, I should have done more, or I could have done more today, or I didn't do more today. Usually you find that circular thought pattern happening in your bed. And I recognize sometimes you're not capable of, going on a walk or doing much in mobility, but please just move outside or move towards at least a window and keep it open to get that staticness out of the way. Okay. Anything else in the coping mechanisms?
I like to encourage everybody, especially if they're struggling, to try and do something every day that gives them pleasure, whether that's patting your dog or listening to music or something that takes your mind away from being sick.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, if you can take away anything from this presentation, I would say it's going to be individualistic to you. What I do if I was in front of you presenting this is I go around the room and I will touch upon each person to say, what's something that brings you joy? And you'll notice that some people have the same things. Most people don't. Most people have a completely different thing that they are into that brings them joy. And I want you to know that treatment plans should always be individualistic to you, whether that be medical, whether that be psychological, social. It should always be about you. So, it's not a one size fits all. Oh, I see knitting.
I'm knitting. I can't knit for long, but I knit and I rest and I knit and I don't hate it. So this brings me joy and knows that next winter somebody will be warm, because while I'm doing Zooms, the only time I have in my life right now, I knit for other people. So that brings me joy.
That's amazing. And I always like to say that if something that can bring us joy can also bring a sense of purpose or benefit somebody else in some way, that's going to bring us a lot more joy too. Anyone else want to share their coping mechanism?
We have a sports car, and when I get into that sports car and we start driving, it's like I'm a different person altogether. And so it just takes everything away from me. I don't even think about the MG. It's a miracle.
Dawn, I like your style. Bring me around in a ride in a sports car. I'm down.
Well, I can no longer drive because of MG, but my husband drives it, so yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I love sports cars. I've never been in one, but in movies, I love them. Okay, so you can see that we all mention things that are very different, right? So keep doing something that you find joy out of. Okay, so what can you do? We're going to go through a little bit. These are titles, actually, of what we're going to talk about. So what can we do about coping with stress is recognize and accept. It's not a weakness. You're not alone. You can't do it alone. It does take a village. And I know that a lot of people say, we've heard the saying, but it really does take a village, right? And that's why we're all here today, because a sense of community brings a sense of togetherness, and a sense of togetherness means that we're not alone. And I think that, especially in the beginning stages of accepting anything that's potentially a negative factor in contributing to our stress, is we want to deny it. How common is that feeling when I started getting the surgeries and the illnesses, and for myself, in relation to soccer, I wanted to deny it. And that led to a perpetuation of more illness, But I did want to deny it initially. But then I came to accept it because I joined a community. It can be an impetus for a change and growth. And I see, evidently all of you in front of me, that it is a change and impetus for growth in this sense of community. I think taking stock. So I feel tense or anxious even when there isn't anything going on that should provoke these. This is essentially a stress scale. I'm more easily irritable or angry than usual. I notice changes in my sleep pattern. And again, like what I said, that could be too much or too little. I'm having trouble concentrated on tasks or making decisions. And I find myself forgetful about things that normally don't slip my mind. And that comes with a state of overwhelm as well. So I experience physical discomfort, like headaches or digestive upsets or muscle soreness, despite no clear explanation. I have frequent colds or illness due to weak immune functioning. I have decreased interest in previously enjoyed hobbies or leisurely pursuits. And my appetite or weight fluctuates markedly. And that could be, again, up or down, right? I could feel alienated or estranged from others or loved ones, and that's that isolation piece coming back in. Increasingly helpless or powerless in situations I once felt capable of managing effectively, and other significant life areas that have suffered because I cannot focus on them fully enough. And that could be with relationships as well, and that ties into that social isolation of potentially our stress is causing us to withdraw from social situations. And again, if we go back to that building resiliency and support, it does take a village. As much as we want to change the world, I think that, everyone has a little bit of I want to change the world in them. It's okay if you change one person, and it is okay if that person is you. But please note that everybody needs each other. Okay? And with that, a caveat to that, everybody needs safe people. Not everybody needs everybody, but everybody needs safe people in their life. So please identify yours. So building resiliency. So resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, and significant sources of stress. Like family or relationship problems, serious health problems that you're going through, or workplace and financial stressors. So it's adapting. That's all resiliency is. It's adaptation of where are we right now? Let's take stock of where we are right now, and what can we do to go forward. It's just adapting to the new environment or situation that we put in plan. So self-care, these are my favorite questions, is what are you all currently doing for self-care?
I walk every single day just to have for the mental health, to get outside and see the birds. And
Yeah, love to hear it.
Well,
Anyone else?
Times a week.
I have just gotten a power wheelchair. So I can get out of the house and into some of the parks that are right around where I live. So that has really helped get me out of constantly thinking about what's wrong and what I can't do. It's now, what can I do?
Yeah, it's interesting what mobility will give us, right? And there's so many ways around mobility now too. So congratulations on getting that. I know that's super exciting as well. Catherine, I think I talked over you. I'm so sorry. But
I go to a gym 3 times a week, and everybody at the gym has got a heart or a lung issue. So we all have something to share and support each other with.
okay, that's awesome. Fit people over here. Anyone else like to share?
I didn't want to, but I got what I call a four-wheeler, which is I can't even remember the walker, and so that helps me get out and walk. And at the beginning, I felt very self-conscious, but now I'm not at all.
Good, because realistically, what does it give you?
Freedom.
Exactly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to be self-conscious is entirely understandable, but realistically, you're preventing yourself from having that freedom by not going out with it, right? And it feels so good. So thank you for sharing. These are some self-care plans that I think that are the best questions to form one for yourselves. So what am I currently doing for self-care? A lot of times when clients come to see me, they can't answer any of these, because they're in such a state of disarray that they haven't even thought of them. So these are good questions to think about. What am I currently doing for self-care? What do I need to do every day to stay well? It's nice if once or twice a week I do this thing that I really look forward to, but am I doing everything on a daily basis or anything small on a daily basis that feeds back into myself? What do I need to do in general to stay well? And that could be like diverting plans with your doctors or your healthcare team, or in an emotional sense of making sure that we have somebody to talk to, especially relying on family and interpersonal relationships. What things do you find yourself not doing? And this is a big one because it could be taken different ways. What things do you find yourself not doing? It could be taken in the acceptance stage. What can I not do anymore? And what's realistic to me? But also, what things that I want to do and I can do that I'm not doing right now that could be feeding back into positivity.
With me, I host 2 support groups a week, and I concentrate on everybody that's in the group and not on what I'm going through. So that can be positive in the fact that I'm not hung up on myself, or it could be negative in the fact that I'm ignoring what I should be focusing on. So it could be either one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, it's good thank you for saying that, by the way, because it's good to take into account that with acceptance comes negatives too. I'm not here to kind of force just positivity, because that doesn't go in line with what I'm saying on the sine wave, right? There's going to be ups, there's going to be down. 5 of us have mental health issues because we are all human. We experience a range of emotions And I'm not here to say that it's all rainbows and sunshine, because again, I've worked in chronic pain clinics, right? But some days do have those rainbows, and a lot of days have those rains. But I think that, establishing what things do I find myself not doing that could maybe force some sunshine into my life that I so need, or could maybe let me have an alleviation of symptoms, I think that's beneficial too. Yeah, Tina.
I just wanted to say that I make sure that I attend the support groups that I have. And Linda's been an excellent host, but I also have 2 other groups that I do. And I find on days when I don't have something to look forward to, they're very difficult because I'm very socially isolated. And
Yeah.
these things it's a lifeline. So thank
Yeah, and I think that that's awesome feedback too. And if you're finding that this is the lifeline, potentially there's other support services that we could access on those days off too, right? And I'll talk a little bit about what you can access. And I'm going to give you guys all actually like a free access to Bounce Back that I think is so beneficial. But thank you for weighing in, Tina, and being vulnerable there, because I think that we should all feel comfortable to be vulnerable, and that's how, we get better as a group. Mental health should be always talked about. And a lot of times people associate that mental health with mental illness, but it doesn't always have to be, because again, 5 of us have mental health. We all experience the ups and downs. And I'm really sorry to hear that you're feeling isolated, but I am so glad to hear that you're a part of these groups. And I'm so thankful that I'm welcomed in this today. And then, the last one is, what are we able and willing to start working on? And that kind of ties into the other thing that I said. What do we want to do that we're not doing right now? What do we want to start doing? That's potential. That has potential to be realistic for us. Okay, with this, when to seek professional help. I might be biased because, again, I'm a clinician, but I think that you don't need to feel like the sky is falling to seek help. And, I am very cognizant and very down to earth in knowing that it doesn't necessarily have to be a clinician that you speak to, but it can be. I think that, you should be identifying supports, because again, I'll go back to that saying, it does take a village. You should be identifying safe people in your life that you feel okay with speaking about these hardships with. But when to seek professional help, it's when we're feeling so overwhelmed that we're having incapabilities of coping. Our daily lives or activities and living are impacted. That self-care plan is hard to come by because we're so low that we don't feel like we can do it on our own. We can't return to our normal routine. We can't set realistic goals for ourselves. We have thoughts of harming ourselves or others, or we're using drugs or alcohol to kind of have that coping mechanism. So, when we're feeling that extreme hopelessness, I would encourage you to reach out. I know that, 988, just like 911, but 988 is a crisis line for mental health everywhere in Ontario. And there's like a larger one for Canada in general, but 988 is a good line to reach out to for mental health advocacy when we're thinking of harming ourselves. I will also say, if you go to your local CMHA, Canadian Mental Health Association, you get therapy for free. So I always like to kind of advocate that, because I recognize that financial stressors are a big stressor component in this life. When eggs are $10, we need to start barring together and getting a sense of community. So I do recognize that as well. So where to seek support? We got our family doctors, we got our psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists. We have, we have our faith, we have family and friends, we have employee assistant programs or employee family assistant programs, we have peer support. And then we have bounce back. But before I go on and speak about bounce back really quickly, who do we turn to right away? If you can identify someone right now, who would you turn to in a situation that you have a high stressful impact? Can you think of one in your head? And if you're uncomfortable saying it out loud, that's entirely okay. I recognize that it takes courage to speak up. But if you can identify one right now, are you able to?
Catherine. My husband.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, spouses oftentimes.
I have a friend with a different autoimmune problem that we often share.
Yeah, and you can find support through friends. And friends, family, workers, therapists, anyone that is important to you, that feels safe to you. That's where we reach out, right? And that's where, even though you feel like potentially you want to self-isolate, I would really push you to kind of engage in community supports. As Tina said, like, they really can't be lifelines, right? And those lifelines can add so much to our lives and help us with that support plan that we have. So this bounce back program that I'm talking about, this is the information. It is free. There's self-help programs, and you can either access the online videos with this access code right here. Can you see my mouse?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. You can access this code if you wrote that down, even if you wanted to take a picture of it, or Linda, if you want me to email you this information, yes, I can.
Please email me the information and I can make sure that it's on our website and that I have it, because I talk to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that it's such a good resource to use. And the online videos, if you didn't want to connect with a therapist, you can go to the online videos and you can get, self-help videos there for free. If language is ever a barrier, they are available in 17 different languages. So I think that's pretty freaking cool. But if you do have a family doctor, you do need a referral to that from that family doctor if you want to use the telephone coaching. But that's a pretty cool resource as well. And again, CMHA does have free resources, so I would encourage you to reach out to the one that's local to you. And oftentimes they can do Zoom appointments as well. So just another factor. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, I just wanted to mention, you mentioned about, what is it, 988?
Yeah, crisis
that's
line.
Also the same number for people living in BC. I know there's a couple of us from BC, so it's the 988 as well.
Yeah, so it is a national crisis line. I just don't want to overspeak when I say national, because I recognize that we live in different places and rural capabilities, but they are a crisis line. They have mental health trained clinicians on staff that answer those calls. When you are experiencing thoughts of suicide, I would please urge you to call somebody if you have someone else.
Yeah. And anybody interested in BC, there's a phone number I can give them as well.
Awesome. Okay. Any questions? Perfect. That was thorough. Thank you so much for your participation. It's really lovely. I love seeing people participate in these. It makes it a lot more fun. I'm recognizing now that I look a little orange. I promise I'm not. I haven't looked at myself all presentation, but The colors here are weird. This is purple in the back too, so I don't know what's going on. But thank you so much for having me, and it's always a pleasure, Linda. And I hope to see you all again soon.
Yeah, and MG Canada thanks you for agreeing to come and talk to us.